get ready, because this is about to be the best conference in college basketball this year, hands down. Last year, the Big 12 was very good, but they ended up going 7-8 in the tournament and had no teams make it up to the Elite Eight. And they were tied for the most teams in the tournament. So very disappointing show for them last year, but I can't necessarily predict what is going to come tournament time, but it's looking like it'll be much improved, and they might have some Final Four, maybe even some national championship caliber teams. But obviously Big 12 is much bigger now. It's not 12, it's 16 with all the dumb names. So let's go ahead and start off with the bottom tier. These are teams that I don't think are going to really contend for a tournament spot, bubble spot, anything like that. Starting off at 16, the worst team, I have Colorado. Yeah, they made the tournament last year, were very talented. All that talent went to the NBA, like basically all of it. Only one of the guys that didn't go to the NBA transferred, so lost all their good players. They attempted to go get some other like Division II players that played really well. We'll see how that translates on a consistent basis in, obviously Division I. They got one interesting recruit in Andrew Crawford, but that's about it. So I expect Colorado to be back down here this year. Oklahoma State at 15, they just didn't really make up for their lost talent, and they didn't even have a ton of talent to begin with last year. They didn't get many intriguing transfers at all. Majority of their transfers are from smaller schools, but they didn't even really dominate at those smaller schools, so I'm not really loving what Oklahoma State is putting together right now. Utah for me is next. The analytics like Utah as a sneaky team. It could happen for sure. Maybe they do better than I think. They changed a lot around, but the guys that they brought in are just younger and really unproven guys that have been, from teams on other Power 5 schools that just maybe haven't really gotten the run. So, hey, maybe they found some diamonds in the rough with these players. I'm just not going to particularly bank on it. And then Arizona State at 13. They will probably be all over the place and not be a consistent team, but they have a lot of young, talented players, and I think a team that you might at least want to maybe check out. Jaden Quaintance, I believe is how you say his name. He's the 16th ranked prospect coming out of high school. He went to Arizona State. Jason Sannon, he's number 22. So they got two top 25 recruits, and then they got Amir Ali from the recruiting as well, and he was 51. So they got three guys in the top 50 for freshmen. So if they can keep them, there'll be a talented group in the future. It's just going to be like, I don't really know if it's going to be here this year. Brandon Gardner and Austin Nunez are two former 4-stars that didn't get much playing time where they were at their other schools. So, hey, maybe don't be surprised if they win versus a better team or a ranked team here and there based on the talent that they have. At least young talent. I just don't know if it's all going to come together. Then we got another gap, and this gap is relatively big, and it is teams that I think can be in the bubble conversation. Yes, 12 and up, I think, are Big 12 teams that are going to be at the very least in the bubble conversation. First one is going to be West Virginia. Might be too high, but I do love their coach in Darren DeVries. He obviously coached Drake last year. And I'm really interested to see how they do with him at the helm in year one. He brings over his son in Tucker DeVries, who was one of the best players at his mid-major college for Drake. And I think his talent is probably going to translate to success, I believe, at least personal success at the Big 12 level, even if it is much harder competition. I think he can suffice and go ahead and play up to that level of competition. It's just the other guys around him, I'm not really sure. They have a brand new team with a lot of transfers, and a lot of those transfers are from other smaller schools, so I think some of the other guys might take some time adjusting to the higher level of competition, but they do have a good star, so we'll see how they go. TCU, while I think they did definitely get worse, they're still like a viable team, and they're going to look to, or they did look to a lot of these lower schools to maybe get stars that maybe other teams didn't see. And we'll see if it translates to the Big 12. Noah Reynolds, who averaged 20 points per game at Green Bay. Tezrian White, who averaged 20 points per game at UNC Wilmington, who obviously had an upset last year, so I think that one might be kind of more interesting. And then Vasan Aleti, who was averaging 17 at Old Dominion. So all these guys are going to need to contribute, and ideally one of them will fill the role that they had with Jameer Nelson Jr. and Emmanuel Miller, who have both left. But they got a lot of recruits. The best one being Micah Robinson. So we'll see what TCU does. I'm not necessarily thinking that if I had to bet, that they would make the tournament. Then we have BYU. Head coach Kevin Young comes from the NBA. He was the associate head coach for the Suns because BYU's head coach is obviously now taken over Kentucky, as that was the opening that was there with John Calipari parting ways. And now he's going to take over a BYU team that, even at number 10 here in the Big 12, I think is still a very viable contending bubble team. I do think they got a bit worse, and they'll need to rely on someone to really step up that they have of younger guys, which is really hard to predict. It would most likely be a guy like Richie Saunders Jr. He's a junior, Richie Saunders, who is probably going to get more minutes in an expanded role. He had a player efficiency rating of 20 last year, which is really good. The coach for BYU, Kevin Young, added 3 top 100 recruits. Cannon Catchings is the best one from that group. So maybe they do something. This head coach is more of an X's and O's guy, so I think with him getting these recruits, it does make me feel pretty good that maybe he can have a stay in college. And with him being an X's and O's guy, I think he's going to be able to get the most out of his players with him coming from the NBA. So BYU might be a sneaky, interesting team as well. UCF, at number 9, they return their 2 best players in Jalen Sellers and Darius Johnson. Both averaged 15 points per game, so that's obviously good. They added 2 smaller school guys who were the best players on their team, Jordan Ivy Curry from UTSA and then Keyshawn Hall from George Mason. Both averaged over 16 points per game. They added a lot of future contributing transfers, along with former 5-star recruit and Mikey Williams, who got in trouble with the law and I think is looking to kind of get his career back on track. So he's kind of a big wild card for this team. If Mikey Williams actually produces and plays and is good, because he was a very high recruit when he came out, I believe 2 years ago or so, these guys could definitely be in the bubble for sure conversation. This roster has a ton of upside and I think should be a bubble team. I just have them at 9 because I do love the Big 12 and just a lot of the teams that they have. And the next one that I do love, but I just have to have at number 8, is Kansas State. I gained my love for Kansas State, to be honest, when Jerome Tang and them made their first run with Marquise Noel 2 years ago. And they don't have a talented team as much like that group that was number 3 in terms of a 3 seed. But I still think they're right there in the bubble and hopefully on the right side. They lost their 3 best players, but they're adding 5 transfers that are going to, I think, attempt to make up the percentage of production that was lost last year. The best one being Coleman Hawkins, who is a super tough and rugged forward from Illinois last year. They got Doug McDaniel, who was one of the best players on Michigan and was more efficient than their guard, Tyler Perry, who they had last year. Ankor, I forget how you say his name, but he's a 6'9" big man. He comes from Samford, not Stanford, Samford, who made the tournament last year, so he definitely has been on a successful team. And they have a lot of other contributing transfers that is coming in. They kept David Nagusin, who is a very good forward who's kind of looking like maybe a double-double machine. And then they got a top 50 freshman in David Castillo. So I think they would be a top 5 team in other conferences like the ACC maybe, but I think that just goes to show how good the Big 12 is. Then we have a low gap. I think these are teams that you might see as these are 4 short tournament teams. Maybe one of these guys falls out, which, yes, we're at 7. That's how many there are. So maybe one of these guys falls out or one of these teams, but I really feel at the moment you could say, hey, even if they're on the bubble, they're probably going to make the tournament. Number 7, which they're ranked 20 in the country, is Cincinnati. Cincinnati's a quietly good team in the Big 12, and the analytics love them. They returned a large majority of their best players. Dan Skillins, Seamus Lukonis, Day Thomas, all of these guys are coming back from last year's team. They added Dylan Mitchell from Texas, who adds to their already good size. So they're a very big team. And then get this, Jizzle James. Yes, that's his name. He was a freshman last year, and he had a pretty good, efficient season when he got minutes. So they are a sneaky good team with some funky names that you might know as the season goes on. But they're a very tall and very deep team, which I think has the makings for a potentially relevant tournament team. Then we have at number 6, Baylor, who is technically ranked number 8 in the country. That's how good the Big 12 is. But you know what? They did lose a lot, which is why they're lower for me than they normally are. But they're still a good team who has a high ceiling, but I think maybe a little bit of a low floor. They lost so many contributors, a lot of them to the NBA. They did add a few big names. Norchad Omier from Miami, who was a contributor on that Final Four Miami team. Jeremy Roach, who's been a longtime guard at Duke. And then most notably, a potential high lottery pick, probably one and done, in VJ Edgecombe, who is a top 3 prospect who's coming in to Baylor. Langston Love and Jordan Nunn return as key starters. And I think they did lose overall probably majority of their high tier talent. They just have a lot of low or high floor guys, low ceiling, solid guys, but I don't know really how much they're going to give you extra production. So a lot of pressure is going to be on VJ to kind of play that vital role for this team where he can accelerate and be the for sure best player who can maybe explode on certain nights. So a lot of pressure is going to be on him. So it might take a while in the beginning for them to really get it going. But I still think this is definitely a tournament team for sure. Then number 5, I have Texas Tech. They're not ranked at all, which is interesting, but I think they're a pretty under-the-radar team, and they sneakily improved. Coach Grant McCaslin was the coach for North Texas when North Texas beat Purdue in 2021 in the tournament, and now he has his best team by far at Texas Tech. They did lose their top 2 scorers, Pops Isaac and Joe Toussaint, but they added JT Toppin from New Mexico, who I really, really like. They returned 3 other 10 points per game scorers, the biggest one being Darian Williams, who's going to be a junior now and probably going to improve. Kevin Overtone is a guard who's been a lead guard for those good Drake teams that we mentioned earlier. Federico is a raw but really talented tall big man who's going to help a lot with their size. And this is a quiet team who I think can hold their own in the Big 12 and is just going to solidly go in there and make the tournament as they did last year. But got bounced by, obviously, NC State. Then we have another gap. And this gap is the teams that I think can contend for the conference and are for sure tournament teams. And yes, there's 4 of them. Number 4 is going to be Arizona. They're ranked number 10 in the preseason poll. They did lose a lot of production, but I think they seem confident in replacing them with guys that they have in-house, and I think the analytics also agree. Caleb Love is the biggest one, though. He returns. Obviously, the biggest piece they have, former Carolina guard. He was at Arizona last year, averaged 18 points per game. Jaden Bradley and KJ Lewis are both guys that they have that are going to anticipate bigger roles, and I think they showed to be good sophomores and freshmen last year, so they're going to be juniors and sophomores, and they're going to have to contribute. They have a freshman last year who in Motejas Krivas. That was terrible. I don't know, but is foreign, but he's good. He was a freshman last year. He's going to need to be an impactful big man for them. Their transfers were nothing crazy. They did get a top 20 recruit in Carter Bryant, so he might be thrusted in to play some minutes to contribute right away. But I think they'll sit comfortably at this end of the contention tier at around 4. Number 3, I have Iowa State, and they're 5 in the country. So the third best team in one conference, they have them ranked number 5 in the country, which is pretty crazy. But it's Iowa State. So I want to say don't doubt this team. They are good for sure. Defensively, they're insane. Offensively has been the issue, though. But I do think they kind of improved it a little bit this year. This is a defensive, grinded-out team that just takes it to another level, top two at minimum defensive teams last year, and they look to be the same this year. They lost a few contributors like Trey King, but they kept the biggest piece, which is Tamian Lipsey. So Tamian Lipsey is going to be the main guy that you're going to know his name. He's kind of their main offensive scorer, but he's still a great defensive guard. And they also kept their two other leading scorers behind him in Keyshawn Gilbert and Milan Mosilovic. They added transfers like Joshua Jefferson from St. Mary's, who's a very similar player that head coach TJ Altenberger is just going to want, like a really grinded out defensive dude. My issue with Iowa State has always been their offense, but I think they might have a bit more offensive upside this year. They were, for the record, in the 50s in terms of offensive rating, projected offensive efficiency, and they're projected to be 30th this year, which still, for contending like title team, like you want higher, but for a team that's going to go to the final, maybe like trying to go to the Final Four at least, if they have, a top 2 offense and or a top 2 defense and the offense is like around 30th, that's totally good enough. So, I think we'll see how far the offense can take them, and it'll depend on who they play, but they're going to be a matchup nightmare for certain teams. Number 2 for me is Kansas. Yes, the number 1 team I have at number 2 in their conference. Now, I wasn't a big fan of KU last year, and it showed, I think, at least relatively. I think they got some good matchups in the tournament to where they could at least make it to the Sweet 16. But this year's KU team should be a really good bounce-back season for them. Again, I feel number 1 is too high. Number 1 in the country, I feel like it's too high, but that doesn't mean that they're still not a very great team and could easily contend for the title, and they actively are and should be. They lost key starters in Kevin McCullough, and then a bench spark guy in Johnny Furphy. Both of them went to the NBA, but they had maybe the best transfer class. They got A.J. Storr out of Wisconsin, who averaged 17 points and was a very key starter for them, one of their better players. Shooting guard Zeke Mayo, who averaged 19 at South Dakota State and is looking to make a big impact, kind of like a Dalton Connect last year did. Rylan Griffin, who's a very key glue guy and was a starter for Alabama last year. And Shaquille Moore, who's a good defensive guard from Mississippi State. So they added a ton of good transfers, and they brought back Hunter Dickinson, who is in contention to be the best player and win the Wooden Award. And they also brought back 2 other starters that they had in KJ Adams and Juwan Harris. So they're going to return 3 starters that are going to play a big role, who are going to play into their at least better defensive identity. They have their superstar in Hunter Dickinson. They got a lot of good offensive and defensive transfers. So I think they have all the makings to be a very good contending team. And you might say, well, why aren't they number 1? Because number 1 is Houston for me. And they're number 4 in the country. But Houston, this might be the year. I'm not picking them right now. It's hard to really pick people. I kind of prefer to pick once the tournament actually happens. But they, for me at least, are the number 1 team in the conference and maybe in the country. Now in year 2, in the Big 12, I think that with them having been in the Big 12, it's going to be the reason that they reached the success that they were hoping for. And if they stayed in the other conference like the American, I don't know if they ever would have reached that. It's not going to be easy, though. It is not going to be easy because this is a gauntlet. But from all the metrics I've seen, it seems like they are the clear number 1. They did lose Jamal Shead to the NBA, but they basically kept everyone else. They only added 1 transfer, Milos Uzan, who averaged 10 points per game at Oklahoma State, and he's a good defensive guy, so he'll fit right in. But this is a very deep team. It's a very deep team. They have the 4th ranked bench, and they have a lot of continuity because they've played with each other for a year already. My issue with Houston teams has always been the offense, and it's why I've always doubted them. But I think this could be the year where the offense is finally good enough to pair with their number 1, number 2 elite defense. And that starts with guard LJ Cryer, because he's back and he was really good offensively last year, and I think he could even take a little bit of a step up. My only concern would be their size, and they're going to be playing a lot of small ball with like 6'8" being their biggest player. That doesn't mean it's not going to work. It's just going to mean that they're going to have to really play into that small ball role and force teams to, give in. And in the tournament, I have never picked them to make the Final Four because I've always found an issue in certain stuff and maybe with matchups. And it's, again, similar with Iowa State, but to a better level. It's always been the offense, but this might be the year. We have to see it. I want to see it because if they can produce against this gauntlet of a Big 12, then I think we could see them, rightfully in the Final Four. They made the Final Four before, but they got blown out, and they kind of had a slight cakewalk to the Final Four. So I think they're not even really looking at the Final Four. They're looking at a title, or at least making the national title. They're trying to add and be like Baylor as being the farthest West Coast team to win it all in the past few years. And that's not even West Coast. It's literally Texas. So that goes to show you who's been winning everything. But for me, Houston is the best team in this absolute gauntlet of a conference for 2024-2025 college basketball season.